There's a button that says go live. Well, there we are. Look at that. Okay, we cut that short, but that's all right. That's okay. We're live here, folks. This is my second live podcast of the day. The first one was the three podcasters walk into a bar. Yesterday, I recorded a live episode with Tom Nelson, a great guy, and today I have Hugo Kruger from South Africa. Hugo, how you doing?
You're good. Good yourself, David, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. This second time you've done our podcast. Really appreciate it. You're such a wealth of information. For those who are not familiar with Hugo, you can find him. You can follow him on Twitter. It is HK Kruger. No H.
Yeah, it's H Kruger, TJIE at Kruger.com. Just
There
search
we
my
go.
name and surname. You'll find
Yeah,
me. Don't worry.
yeah.
Um,
Great Twitter feed. What other social media do you do?
so I'm on Substack as well, and then I've got a small YouTube channel as well. And then I actually write now as a weekly columnist for it's a South African newspaper called Independent Online on energy matters. And
Fantastic.
we've got a very good supporting editors. It's one of the, I think, the second largest circulation in the country. And the editor is very much pro free speech. So she puts me with the Renewable Church every week to give the counter narrative. And I appreciate that. So there's at least debate on the topic back home.
That's fantastic. It's so great too, and I write at several different publications too, all of which are very pro free speech. Give me all sorts of latitude to write about the topics that I'm interested in that I think are important. The Telegraph, Daily Caller. I guess I should say who they are. Forbes. They're all just a terrific editorial staff and free speech platforms, which are becoming sadly, an increasing rarity in our societies today, aren't they?
They are, and the challenge is that many publications are running out of money because people don't want to pay for the news
Right.
anymore. So it gets skewed to advertising, and the problem with that is then they get captive to the to the advertisers. But there is some pushback against it. I mean, you're seeing blogs, you're seeing Substacks. I make some money out of Substack as well for myself, and that gives me
Hmm.
a better relationship with my subscribers. Although I haven't figured out because sometimes I annoy them, and so then I lose them, and I get a new cream, and
Yeah, me
it's
too.
difficult to figure out. It's difficult to figure out who likes me and who doesn't like me anymore. But I'm beyond the point where I care about that, and I'm not old yet.
Yeah,
But yeah,
you
I
kind of
mean,
have to have that attitude, don't you?
so speaking of energy matters, it's interesting to note how dogmatic the debate can be.
Yeah.
And when you say, I mean, I'll give you an example a few months ago. I think yeah, you shared this also on your Substack. I wrote an article of Dr. Lars Schoenecker on the case for coal, just pointing out an obvious fact that it's still 25% of the world's energy and 35% of the electricity. It's a massive amount of stuff. And here people are saying, oh, we're just going to get rid of coal plants tomorrow. I'm like,
Right.
okay, fine. Let's do that. What is your alternative system? How fast can you build it? Do you have it standing ready? I mean, there are some things coal can do that even gas struggles with, right? Gas has got its own speciality, and you just want to get rid of it. And my argument has been, sorry, I'm in favor of investing what makes business sense. And if that means coal declines and dies a slow death, or gas, I don't have a bone about it. The problem I've got is that the government is choosing who's going to win, and they
Yeah.
just keep on throwing money at one solution. And this is not how markets work. This is not how business is supposed to work, right?
Right. And they're throwing the money at solutions like wind that really are not a solution. They're not a solution at all to replacing baseload power generation, reliably supplied 24/7 a day by coal or natural gas or nuclear. And that's my biggest problem with it. If they were actually uh, throwing money at solutions that might actually work, I probably wouldn't have as big a problem with it all.
I work this out. So if you take Joe Biden's $1 trillion that he gave to these guys and you put it in nuclear, which is more expensive
Oh
than
yeah,
oil and gas, let's be honest, okay? But if you put it in nuclear, you can replace a third of the US's electricity. Okay, and you probably get better numbers than that
yeah,
because you get economies of scale going. So if you want to end the argument, I'm like, okay, let's take government money. We accept, okay, whatever your view on the economy and government is, and let's just have a mass build of nuclear like France did in the 1980s. But why aren't we doing that? Because they are, greasing some palms. This is not really about the climate, is it? It's not really about the most optimal energy solution. And I put a disclaimer in here. I've worked on oil, I've worked in gas, I've worked in offshore wind, and I've worked in nuclear. So you can accuse me of being whatever bias. Wind on land makes some sense, but people don't always want it there.
Right.
Offshore wind is struggling. And then you've got the case, if you look at the flagship companies for these countries, which is South Australia, California, and Germany, you find that they still have enough fossil fuel capacity to meet their demand. So even if they're burning less fossil fuels, they've got two systems running basically. And
Exactly.
what do you do with the second system? You have to amortize it. What does it cost? It's very difficult to work it out and we can make any sense of it because they keep on bailing out companies left, right, and center. So you don't actually know whether the actual electricity price you're paying, that so-called cheap price, is reflective of the market price. In some cases, it isn't even cheap, you know.
Right. Right. Our system in Texas, our bills, our utility rates in Texas are 30% higher than they were when Joe Biden took office. Um, Even though the price of natural gas, the marginal, which is usually the marginal, was designed to be the marginal price on the system that determined pricing the utilities could charge, is incredibly low. It's at the lowest point it's been at in 15 years, but our bills keep going up. And why do they keep going up? Because we've added all these additional costs and fees onto the bills to amortize the second grid that we're building with wind and solar. And unfortunately, our government, even though we have a supposedly conservative state government, they continue to try to hide the ball from consumers because they know it's their bad legislative and regulatory decisions that have created the mess. And that's one of the great points you made when you were on last time was we need to go back to treating electricity as a service rather than a commodity, right?
We,
I mean, that's
we, we,
not
we,
the go ahead,
we
go
we
ahead.
need to we need to sell it like cell phone contracts, is my view. Cell
Yeah,
phone contract, it works where it's on all the time, and the data usage. Yes, it matters, but it's not what drives the cost. The cost is driven by emergency fuel, which in the US is natural gas. South Africa it's coal or diesel, actually. So, that is the price that should set what do you call the market price. I think we need to have a big debate as to whether or not the Enron lobbied for regulation model still makes sense with wind and solar on the grid because your natural gas does not just provide electricity, it provides a capacity service. Now, many countries got around this by by adding capacity charges or a capacity market. The Germans said we're not going to have that. And then when the price of coal or gas shoots through the roof, they say, well, we're just going to bail out that company. That's also
yeah,
not the market, right? So what I'm saying is, why don't we do this? We have a fixed tariff, and we try and reduce the consumption to something much less. So you still pay the same in the end of the month, but you restructured the pricing mechanism. Because or what you can do is you can tell the solar and wind guys you can still compete on the condition that you've got what we call firm supply contracts. In
right.
other words, you're going to price it back up. It has to be part of your business model. And if you do that and you're still competitive, and maybe they are, then they should be allowed to compete. But the issue at the moment is they're offsetting the full service cost to the end user, and they're passing the insurance cost onto the poorest households. And it's particularly pernicious in countries with national utilities like South Africa, where only one third of our electricity price is actually for electricity. So then a guy with a solar panel comes and he says, aha, I'm going to set off the full cost. And then we say, okay, what about a transmission system? What about a distribution system? Is that going to fall on the utility? And we saw that in California as well. The utility goes bankrupt while they're offsetting the
Right.
full service cost. And that's what they now call the missing money problem in electricity. Okay. And who pays for missing money? Well, governments have got no answer. And that's coming back to your question. We've got the second parallel system to guarantee reliability. And that's why your prices aren't going off and down, even though the sun and wind is free.
Yeah. I owe you a debt of gratitude, by the way. When we talked last year, you reminded me I had kind of lost sight of the fact that the way we structured our grid in Texas in the 2001 session of our state legislature was based on the Enron model. Enron lobbied
Yeah.
for that system. And so since that time, when I do media calls, I get media calls occasionally to talk about the grid. I always make that point that our grid was designed by the crooks who ran Enron and
And you
created
know which
one.
country was the first country to implement this? Was actually Chile after Augustus
Right.
Pinochet took power in a coup d'etat.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he
Exactly.
forced these so-called reforms into it. So you're dealing here with a despot type
Yeah.
of system, okay, to the very top. And Enron, even back then, with the predecessors to Enron, I don't think they existed, played some role in here. So you've got a system that grew out of criminality.
Yes,
And we
absolutely.
basically just went along with it. And since the Enron scandal, there's not been a major restructuring in the US to actually push back against it. Now, I don't think national utilities might have made sense. I mean, I don't know what the best model is, but we need to recognize that the current model, something is not right here. Because you've got all these balancing authorities in the US, there's all these gas peakers just standing
Oh
idle.
my God. Yeah.
And, and again, who pays for idle plants? Okay, well, at the end of the day, it's a consumer, but it's being hidden. So I would say, no, all of that has to be priced correctly so you can get consumer behavior that corresponds with what we're actually selling people. And it
Yeah.
doesn't seem that debate doesn't seem to come through.
No, it really doesn't. It's such a complex thing. I mean, in Texas, you may or may not be aware, we've already had 2 different days in April, the mildest weather month every year, of from ERCOT about concerns they may not have adequate generation on the grid to meet demand. Now, what's going to happen in August and September? And people, I understand that, yeah, a lot of plants were down during those times for maintenance, but it all points to the reality that the thing is become so incredibly complex. The people at ERCOT are very smart people, right? I mean, they really are. They're very smart people. I know some of them. But the system is so complex, so burdened down with intermittent wind and solar that you cannot predict on an hourly basis. You're not going to know what you're going to have. And they get caught several days every year like that, where they think they're going to get 12 gigs from wind and they get 4 because the wind stopped blowing in West Texas unexpectedly. Um, it's almost impossibly complex for people to manage anymore, and that in and of itself is a problem, right?
Well, grid operators are starting to speak out. This is from
Yeah,
what I've seen now. They mentioning reliability was almost non-existent in our vocabulary a few years ago. Now they're talking about the reliability criteria. And I'm seeing Australia making New South Wales, I think, saying the call's going to stay longer. South Africa said we're finally going to extend the call life cycle of the call plans. Remains to be seen if the government will act on it, right? And
right.
you're seeing signs of this stuff. You're seeing even the Germans saying that we want to keep the call longer for security measure. Why would they do that if the other stuff is reliable? Are they just being precautious? Maybe it's like the cautious. Maybe the other stuff can be reliable on its own. But we'll have to see. But what is going to happen? I mean, the only choice the system operator has during that case is to do what we've been doing in South Africa for the last 20 years: load shedding. Load shedding was not is a manually induced thing. The
Yeah,
system operator says we're gonna switch off lights in some areas because otherwise you have a grid collapse. And if you have a grid collapse, Venezuela had it a few years ago. You've got miners trapped underground with no ventilation. I mean, it's just going to be a disaster. So that is what system operators luckily have thought of this, where they're going to say, where they're starting to say, we've got contingencies plans in place in case that happens. Now, what has come down is the system operator in this system that is sort of because what we're actually talking about is the Enron system is now coming apart. We don't know
yeah,
which way it's going to come, right? And the system operator is now becoming a far more centralized role. They've got far more authority than they used to have. And they're going to start dictating and saying, no, no, guys, we don't put more of this stuff here. We need batteries here, or we need bigger gas plants or whatever. But we need to first sort out the reliability criteria. And then the magic question is, with all this complexity, how do you service that full service cost? Who pays for it? How do you allocate that cost to the consumers? I mean, I don't know how it's going to play out. Countries have different solutions. So France has a capacity charge where you pay a fixed tariff. It's not a lot
right.
yet, and they have a time of usage charge. Okay, in some places, the US you still have the fluctuating rates, but even some states in the US, I think Chicago has got capacity charges already. So it's becoming very difficult to even compare these states with each other because how much do I pay at the end of the month if my tariff structure is different? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to coal for a second. I know
Mm.
you saw the announcement from the G7 that all the countries in the G7 in Europe and the United States, Japan, pledged to phase out coal. They call it unabated
Unabated.
coal. Unabated coal. Which for my viewers who don't know is a coal plant is unabated if it doesn't have carbon capture and storage technology associated with it. Okay, to take the carbon out, even though that's completely unproven technology as relates to coal plants and to natural gas plants, but EPA is mandating it in the United States anyway. So the G7 agreement's completely consistent with the EPA regulation that was released last week. I have a pending column at the Telegraph that the headline is going to be the G7 surrenders. And what I mean by that is we're surrendering on the question of energy security. And I think that
Right.
that agreement is essentially that, isn't it? I mean, do you agree with that or not?
Well, a few things to mention. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Europe quickly shifted LNG to coal. The coal
Yeah.
supply chain has always been geopolitically neutral. There is no war that's been fought over coal, to my knowledge, because it's everywhere. It's so abundant, right? It's got, as I say, it's got things that even gas and oil does not have, which is geopolitical security. I mean, that's a big thing that you're getting rid of, right? The country to watch on this is Japan. Japan last year said we're not going to phase out coal. Their leadership was quite firm that they will try and reinvest into the coal value chain. They will try and clean it up, and they have pushed at that stage ammonia to be burned with the coal. And they said maybe that can reduce the CO2. Now it remains to be seen if that
Okay.
is going to work, right? The other one that people are pitching at the moment is calcium carbonate solutions. So it's like a soda can type of thing, limestone. And apparently you can make a coal plant under those conditions competitive with natural gas.
Yeah.
Again, where's your model? Where have you shown it to me? Right, this
Yeah.
is what you've been asking. Okay. If that works, fine. Okay, then the question is, what do you do with all the CO2? Now, I show people a bit of a lesson here. South Africa makes one third of our petrol, of our gasoline from coal. Okay,
Yeah.
because of the Fischer-Tropsch process. The company is Sasol. It's got the highest intensity of coal use and CO2 usage in the world. Okay, just south of Johannesburg, in a place called Sasolburg. Um, in the past, they didn't know what to do with the CO2, so they made dry ice. They could not sell all the dry ice, just too much of it. Okay, so what are you going to do with all the captured CO2? I mean, are you going to pump it into concrete? Some people are talking of. The magic price people are coming at is they say if it's between 65 to $100 a ton of CO2, then there might be a business case to capture some of the CO2.
Yeah.
And maybe that'll work out. But again, you're subsidizing an industry. And the question I've got with all of this, David, is why are we doing this at all? I
No,
mean, I
me
asked you
too.
this when you were on my show the first time is why are we even bothering with this? Because look at what China and India is doing. They couldn't care less. Okay, so what are
Right.
we offsetting in the G7? Sorry, India and China is just saying we're not going to go along with it, guys.
And
What are you doing?
Indonesia too. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Indonesia and Vietnam. I mean, the Vietnam has
Right.
had a faster GDP growth than China in the last 10 to 20 years per person. Okay, why? Because they're expanding coal. And Vietnamese leadership. I mean, posted on Twitter the other day said, "Burn coal through the winter, burn coal through the summer. We need coal, and just keep on pumping because we want economic growth." So the Asians have figured it out. I'm a bit disappointed at Japan for not standing up enough. And we'll see what's going to happen in Japan if the Japanese are really going to go along with it or not. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we're going to pay an opportunity cost for walking away and attacking the core value chain. That's my view. I don't know what it's going to express itself as, but it's used to be that coal is for the winter and summer for the extreme peaks. Gas is a nice flexible intermittent. And what's going to happen? Gas is now going to become baseload, which sounds nice if you're selling oil and gas. But what's going to happen if there's a freeze in the gas pipelines again, if there's
Right.
a major thing? Then Texas, I mean, if you compare Alberta to Texas last winter, Alberta was in trouble because it only had gas. Texas had gas, nuclear, and coal as a
Yes.
backup. Okay, so Texas
Yeah.
was in a better position.
Yeah. My big concern is in Texas, and I understand the concerns about coal. But we have shut down 2/3 of the coal plants that existed in this state just 15 years ago, and replaced most of it with natural gas, but also with wind and now more recently solar. So I'm very concerned. It's created a real shortage of dispatchable thermal capacity on the grid, and that's something the legislature acted to try to remedy last time. And I don't know, but it's going to take 5 years to do it. Um, so it's a real problem on our grid. But I want to also let's switch for a second to the oil and gas potential offshore South Africa.
Right.
It's obvious to me, increasingly obvious, I think, that South Africa is going to be a real strategic resource for oil and gas if the government
And
allows
for
it.
geopolitics, I mean, the
Yes,
Cape of Good Hope used to, before the Suez Canal, the Cape of Good Hope is where the European ships went around to India.
right.
Now the Houthis are attacking the ships. So where are
Yeah,
the ships going? They're going through South Africa at the moment. So our ports are doing well at the moment.
yeah,
We our neighbors, I mean, we're in such a good position with the worst government in the world. It's much worse than the UK, US government. Okay. We have Namibia next door extracting oil. They hit oil. Namibia is set to become, from just the early findings, the 10th biggest exporter of oil. It's the
Wow.
second most attractive country after Guyana. Guyana is the most attractive at the moment.
Yeah.
Total
Yeah.
is there, and the French are helping Namibians figuring this thing out. They've had a long plan for the last 10 years. Mozambique on the other side as well is doing the same thing. There was a bit of terrorism in the north, but they've now sorted it out. And they actually in the south, they started extracting. So South Africa is now in a position where we've got poor neighbors that want to sell you oil. We can establish an LNG and oil industry. We already have oil, but an LNG market by just buying from our neighbors, and then later we extract our resources. Because if you look at
Yeah.
where the oil and gas is discovered, it's in the Orange Basin, which is just south of where the Orange South Africa has two major rivers, the Vaal and the Orange River. Where the Orange River goes out to the ocean, to the north, you've got Namibia and South Africa. Most of the areas in the south, and even closer to the Cape of Good Hope in Mossel Bay, there's been another discovery. 2006, the government knew about the gas field. They didn't do anything. 2006. Richards Bay is in the other side of the country, is an ideal place for imports because it's closer to the sea lanes. It's got all the geopolitical
Hmm.
things. Studies been done, government doesn't act on it. And then there's another one, which is Matola in Mozambique, where our only pipeline is, where we can have gas to power, and that creates industrial demand for gas things. So we've got the skeleton of an excellent natural gas infrastructure, but we don't have a government. A government only came out with a master plan last week. I mean, this is ridiculous. Okay, so you're trying to ask them, guys, we've had power deficit for so long. We've got all the shortage of energy. We've got poverty, and you've got all this oil and gas sitting around you and this potential. Why aren't you acting on it?
Yeah.
And if I was Joe Biden, I would say, okay, there's a dispute between the US and South Africa over Israel. Why don't you go knock on their feet and say, do you guys want to extract these gas? We can help you a little bit with that. And let's work out our differences here. And you can actually establish a natural gas economy on the southern tip of Africa. And it's a country that's had historically good relationships with the US. I mean, it's an
Right.
obvious business case.
Yeah. Well, yes, same thing. I mean, you see this in other countries too, like Canada with Trudeau not wanting to do LNG off the east coast of that country when there's a tremendous business case for it. But so much of it just gets eaten up in international politics and the UN
You see,
and WEF.
Canada is what I would call a democratic oil state. They've
Yeah,
got hydro and nuclear at home, so they can only export. The oil states have figured out nuclear, by the way. So Dubai is going nuclear. Why? Because the UAE is exporting oil. So they say, oh, we don't use oil domestically, we're going to export it. It's like their version of the Pickens plan, which was wind and solar, except they're
right.
doing it with nuclear.
Yeah, yeah,
They're doing it a bit more sensibly. And I would argue that Texas should actually do. Why doesn't Texas say, okay, we're a gas export state. Why don't we build nuclear plants? 40 years of none of these renewable oaks coming into your country because they last 40 years. And then you just export that on the world market or you export to the other states. I mean, you'd become even more richer. The Aussies should do the same thing, but Australia is banning nuclear. They've got a moratorium against it. I mean, this is the other insanity. They want to save the climate, but they're still banning nuclear. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me.
it's insane. It's absolutely insane. So, is there no hope for nuclear expansion in South
Well,
Africa?
no, well, so South Africa has got one nuclear plant, and there's an area in the
Yeah,
south called Tuispunt that has been, again, 2015, the studies were done, press location, all cited, and the government just ignores it. They haven't advanced it. Now, they've said last year for the elections now, we're going to do it again. But, is this an empty promise? I don't know. It's a
right. Now,
politician.
once the election's gone, that idea is gone, right?
Well, our blackouts ended 1 month before the election started. Are they burning diesel? I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry.
just
It's not funny. It's not funny, I know, but
yeah,
it's
no,
just also ludicrous.
it is. Yeah, so nuclear will be in South Africa. The country I think that has got the heads right at the moment is the Indians. The Indians are basically saying coal, nuclear, and gas. India is now only establishing its natural gas infrastructure. They're actually
Right.
using them economically inefficiently. They need to up their game a little bit. And I think India will be a country to watch for development. And again, it's a
Yeah.
democracy that's doing the right decisions. You don't see it all the time these days.
No, that's true. Absolutely true. And of course, China is also expanding its use of natural gas as well as coal.
Yeah,
And also helping Qatar expand its own LNG export business with that deal for
yeah.
18 new tankers, which is an
Yeah,
enormous
I mean, but you
number.
see, look at Al Jazeera, right? Al Jazeera is one of the most pro-climate outlets in the world. Well, it doesn't take a genius to figure out their money comes from Qatar.
Yeah,
So why is an oil state promoting that narrative to Western audiences? Well, it's kind of obvious what's happening, isn't it? They want you to stop exporting so they can get the
yeah,
market.
sure. And the Biden
The
administration's helping them with that.
Yeah, the Russians were doing the same in Europe. I mean, Paris, where I'm sitting, has got some of the best natural gas in the Paris Basin, but we're not allowed to frack in Europe. Yet we've got Total going around the world exploiting natural gas.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm like, we've got the skills even, but we're not allowed to do it in France. We could have, taken the Russian supply away from the to Germany if if we had the infrastructure. But again, we're not allowed to exploit it because gas is now dirty for the environment. It's the same nonsense.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, but I'll say this: I'm still optimistic that people are waking up to the facts.
That's my next
It will just take
question,
time.
actually. So when I talked with Tom, Tom Nelson yesterday, he kind of set me back because he was so optimistic about how things are beginning to develop now. He sees a lot of changes happening, um, just in the trends where energy is concerned. I am optimistic in the longer term, but not so optimistic in the near term. I wonder how you're feeling about the direction things are headed.
Well, I would say this: the debate has become a bit more rational in the last few years, even though the
It
government is the
seems,
same.
yeah, yeah,
But the people are debating the right things. The government is still making the crazy
right,
moves, and I don't know if that's desperation on their part or not. But the real debate will come from two countries. One is India, we just talked about. China, I think, is now over their demographic hurdle. Even the Chinese coal is not. China's only upgrading their coal stations at the moment, which is still a lot, by the way.
right.
But the Chinese coal usage has gone a little bit down because they're also expanding renewables and they're expanding natural gas. We spoke. The Indians have really now started upping the ante in coal and nuclear and gas soon to be. And then the other elephant in the room is that by the end of this century, 40% of the world's population will be African. So there's going to be a scramble for African energy. And what are we going to do? And the African leaders are almost unanimous in saying, listen, guys, I mean, the message they're sending to Europe, luckily America didn't colonize Africa, but the message they're saying to the Europeans is like, oh, we've heard this before. You're saying we're not allowed to develop.
Yeah,
We can
yeah,
see this is colonialism. So back off a little bit. And if the debate is between development and climate, I'm sorry, but development is going to lose out. We're going to win out at the end of the day.
yeah,
So the Africans are just going to say we're not going to impede our own economic development, and we're going to use whatever resource we've got, okay, to get to those levels. And that's 40% of the world's population. So what you're actually saying to the US and the EU is you're isolating yourself geopolitically if you continue on this path. And luckily in the US, half the population's awake, the other half's asleep. The Europeans are lost cause. Okay, except the French sometimes wake up a little bit.
Well, they do. That's true. I mean, they're so interesting when it comes to this stuff because you're right. They go through these spurts of absolute rational decision making, and then it all goes crazy again, right? Where we
Yeah.
in the U.S., I don't know. It just all depends on how the presidential elections go. So this has been wonderful. We're bumping up against time. I want to be sure to give you a chance to let people know where they can find you and follow what you do on social media and
Right.
Substack.
Oh yeah, so I'm on Substack. It's you can just search my name and surname. It's Hugo Kruger, and on Twitter as well. And then I write, as I said, for Independent Online. They can look at it in South Africa on energy matters, which is relevant to African energy matters. And I've got an article coming out on South Africa's gas infrastructure, actually, what we should be doing and what we're not doing, which is a long list.
Oh, good. I'll have to read it and take notes and steal from it.
You're welcome to do so. You're welcome to distribute this stuff. But thanks a lot, David. I appreciate this.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate it, Hugo. Best of luck, and we'll do this again soon.
Thank you very much.
All right. And thanks to the Sandstone Group and Stu Turley for hosting the podcast, our great producer, Eric Burrell. I'm David Blackmon. That's all for this time. And end stream.